There we are. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock. We have attendees are still joining, so I'm going to give 2 minutes, maybe just less than 2 minutes to get everyone settled, and then we'll begin the webinar. Great to see so many people here today. This is wonderful. Hi, Sarah from TASIS. It's nice to see you. I can't really see you, but nice to know you're here. Okay, well, as this is being recorded, so if you miss any part of it, you can certainly come back and watch it again. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to put your question in the chat box, or sorry, in the Q&A box. We're going to ask that everyone hold your questions until the end. And everyone is muted, so you don't have to worry about being heard. And excellent. Okay, so I'm just seeing a couple of messages popping up here. Okay, welcome everyone. This is very exciting for me. I love to talk about childcare and how it affects different communities in different ways. My name is Councillor Jen Ford, and I am from the Resort Municipality of Whistler. I am also UBCM's second vice president, and I'm the chair of the Health and Social Development Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that I live and work on is the unceded and traditional territory of the Lil'wat Nation and of the Squamish Nation. Please take a moment to acknowledge the lands that you are on and that we are so grateful to be gathering today. UBCM is very happy to be able to offer this webinar and resource guide on childcare planning. This is an area that is new for many local governments, and this guide covers the basics on childcare planning so that you can decide if or how you want to be involved in childcare planning for your community. This guide could not have been completed without the funding from the provincial government, so thank you to the Ministry of Children and Family Development for your support. I know we have a few members from the ministry today, and we thank you for being here. Today's webinar will begin with a presentation on the guide from our project consultants, Sandra Menzer and Sarah Hubert from Spark BC. We will then showcase 3 municipalities who have taken a role in childcare. Our first will be from the City of Richmond to give you a flavor of childcare planning in larger communities. We have one from Williams Lake to offer you advice from a small to medium-sized community. And we have Sicamous, who will offer an example from a very small community. After those presentations, there will be an open discussion, and question and answers will wrap us up at 3 o'clock. A couple of logistics for today. If you have connectivity issues, you can use the phone number we sent to join by phone. If you're on the phone line, press *9 for the raised hand function when we're at the question and answer period. Our moderators have put everyone on mute. Please stay on mute, except during the question and answer session, where if you are called upon with your question, you can unmute yourself. We will be recording this webinar and we will post it to the UBCM website for those who were unable to attend today. Also, the guide was sent out with the email to remind you about today's webinar. However, the guide is very large and it will get caught in some email filters. So if you were unable to download the guide, you will find the link for it in the chat at some point during today's session, and you'll be able to download it directly from the website later on. Lastly, UBCM is presenting this guide and webinar today for local government staff and elected officials. Therefore, while we have allowed other interested parties to attend this event, we have asked that if you are not representing a local government, please hold your questions during the Q&A and allow our local government elected officials as well as staff to ask their questions first. Now let's move on to the guide. I'm happy to introduce our 2 project consultants for the childcare planning guides. Sandra Menzer is an independent consultant working with a range of nonprofits, local and senior governments, supporting regional and local planning initiatives, childcare policy, and strategic operational planning. She has over 30 years experience in senior leadership and management role in the nonprofit sector, currently chairs the BC Provincial Childcare Council, and is a member of the Vancouver Joint Childcare Council. Sarah Hubert is a researcher at Spark BC and a registered social worker specializing in social justice, children and families, as well as community planning. Sarah has developed knowledge in qualitative and participatory action, research design, and analysis. Sarah provides service such as social and strategic planning, data analysis, program creation, policy development, and program evaluation. As a foundation to her work, Sarah engages with a diverse range of partners in order to truly follow a participatory approach. Over the last 2 years, Sandra and Sarah collectively have worked on over 22 local government childcare action plans throughout BC. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Council. Great to be here with all of you. We're really happy to hear there's over 100 people on the webinar today. So we appreciate your interest, and it sure confirms how important childcare is for families and for our communities. So before we move into our presentation, we just also want to take a moment to honor the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Indigenous people whose land we're gathered on today. Sarah and I have the privilege to live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. We're thankful to be welcomed on these lands and commit to always remember the harms and mistakes of the past. So we are super excited to present an overview of the recently completed Stepping Stones Childcare Planning Guides for BC's local communities. This has been a super interesting project, and we hope it is a useful resource and a great set of tools for you in your childcare journey. Our primary focus today is to give you a peek at what's in the guides and to share some tips and ideas that might work for you. We're going to start by providing just a bit of history and context, say thanks to those who helped make these guides happen. We'll look at why childcare and why childcare now, and then we'll touch on the local governments have. We then will move into a high tour of guides, a show and tell, if you will, of them. We'll also share a few highlights from each, and we'll wrap with some final thoughts. So I'll start us off and hand it over to Sarah. And I see Sarah's trying to move our slide deck along here. Perfect. So I've just covered our agenda. So let's maybe move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. Thanks. So the idea of creating these childcare guides for local governments was first presented to UBCM by the Social Issues Subcommittee of Metro Vancouver Regional's Planning Advisory Committee in 2018. This group really felt that resources and an opportunity to share strategies, approaches, and ideas around childcare would be a great tool as more and more interest and more investment in childcare was happening. UBCM pursued and received support and resources from the province to undertake this work, and a project advisory committee was formed with representatives from local governments across BC, representing urban, rural, and remote communities, and representing a diverse range of childcare experiences. You'll see a listing advice for Sarah and I want to take a moment to say thank you to that amazing, some of whom are on the web today. Thank you for the advice, for the feedback, for the hard questions, and through the development of guides. We also want to send thanks to Marilyn at UBCM for being such a champion for this project, and to the many staff in the provincial government, especially in MCFD, who provided advice and editing along the way. Our final appreciation goes to the many local governments who have worked for many years on childcare. Your ideas, your experience, your efforts really formed the basis of these guides, so thank you. Next slide, please. So why childcare and why now? So it's no secret, childcare is critical. Childcare is needed to support robust local economies, and childcare is also needed for healthy communities and for social well-being. Childcare has proven positive impacts on healthy child development, on gender equity, on social inclusion, and poverty reduction. There's not very many other services that can actually say that. We also know childcare is an essential support for the province and indeed the country for full economic recovery. In fact, the pandemic confirmed childcare as an essential service, a service to be employed for critical emergency. The childcare stars are also finally aligned. There is high public focus and commitments for a federal commitment to create a national childcare system. And really, the bottom line is that there are simply not enough spaces. BC has on average about 20 spaces for every 100 children, with much less for children under 3 years old and school age. And prior to the pandemic, 70% of moms with young children were in the workforce. I'm going to interrupt myself to say I'm going to turn my video off because I understand I have a very unstable connection happening. So let me do that. Sarah, next slide, please. So, the role of local governments. So, while we know that the policy and funding responsibility for childcare rests with the senior levels of government, the province and the feds, local governments have really recognized how critical childcare is to their communities. However, childcare is not a legislated mandate for local governments, and therefore there are no specific or additional resources that flow. However, local governments are, in fact, uniquely positioned to support, plan, and remove barriers for childcare and to communicate your needs to the province. In fact, these local guides demonstrate a wide range of leadership roles that municipalities across the province have already taken on. Things like childcare friendly policies, strategic and action planning work, facilitating new spaces, and even operating childcare. There has been a lot of amazing work that's been done in childcare at a local level by local governments, even without a legislated mandate. These guides offer tips and tools and learnings from that work. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now to start you on your tour of the guides.
Thanks, Sandra. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the guides, and then we'll get into more detail with them later. So the first section of the guide is Introduction and Background. And here in this section, you will learn more about the different government roles and responsibilities, Indigenous and inclusive childcare, and different types of childcare operations. We also, in this introduction and background, briefly discuss what it means to have quality in childcare. Guide 1 is then all about developing a childcare strategy and plan. Many local governments have already completed their plan, but many have not. And so this guide specifically discusses how to align with provincial childcare policy, and it also provides a step-by-step process on building a childcare plan. Guide 2 is about the local government role in facilitating, securing, and financing childcare. Guide 2 has the most information, and it provides insight into multiple actions that local governments can take to facilitate, secure, and finance childcare in their community. Some examples of this is laying the groundwork for zoning and land use regulation, reducing barriers to local government development, zoning, permitting, using land use authority, local government capital allocations and grants. These are just some of the examples that are found in Guide 2. And then Guide 3 reveals the local government's roles in designing and building childcare spaces. So more specifically, this guide includes information on the importance of quality spaces for children, how to select a location, some interior and exterior design considerations, and also some additional considerations if the government is an owner or an operator of childcare. Guide 4 outlines the local government and provincial government roles in the childcare licensing process. So this includes information on types of childcare facilities, local government regulator roles, the provincial licensing process, and navigating the local and provincial processes. The final guide, number 5, is about working with childcare operators and building respectful, mutually reinforcing relationships. The final section is the appendices and references, which contains many more useful resources, including types of childcare programs in BC, terms and definitions, and a discussion on quality childcare. So Sandra and I will now dive deeper into each of the guides and give you a bit more information on what they include and how they can be used effectively. All right, so first up is guide number 1, developing a childcare strategy and plan. This guide first provides information on the importance of aligning with provincial policy and the priority areas of investment. And while childcare services are managed and delivered at a local level, the primary role for policy and funding lies with the province, and local childcare plans should strategically align with the provincial government's childcare commitments and plans. More specifically, BC established the following priority areas of investment. The first, enhance the accessibility of childcare options by increasing the number of spaces. Next, increase affordability of childcare, beginning with infant toddler care. Third, enhance the quality of licensed childcare programs by supporting the training and professional development of early childhood educators, and also enhance childcare equity through targeted investment in underserved communities, such as Indigenous families, families with children with support needs, and young parents and guardians completing their secondary education. So while details of this long-term childcare plan are still unfolding at the provincial level, a number of initiatives towards increasing access, reducing fees, and improving quality have been made. And so this part of the guide directs you to the provincial website for further details. Next in Guide 1 are laid out the steps that can be taken to build a childcare strategy and plan. So undertaking the development of a childcare strategy and then implementing the plan is a significant long-term commitment. And while there's no universally agreed upon best practice for childcare planning, there are several promising practices and key learnings from local governments across British Columbia. So these 6 steps that you see here were developed in partnership with the Advisory Committee, and also this process was used in over 20 local governments across the province. So the 6 steps are: 1, establish internal planning processes. So this includes establishing a staff member to be the project lead, creating a working group to monitor progress, and confirm goals/reasons for taking action. And this step, we wanted to highlight a key tip, which is to confirm your goals, principles, values, and reasons for taking action early on to guide you in your planning processes. Step number 2 is complete a community profile. And you do this by reviewing current childcare spaces and locations, complete an inventory of assets or opportunities such as community centers, libraries, parks, and review policy and bylaws. Also in this step is a chance for you to review relevant demographic information. The third step is develop and implement a public consultation or community engagement plan. Fourth, write a needs assessment using the data from the community profile and community engagement work. Fifth is to plan for change through strategic and operational planning. And sixth, implement, monitor, and report. So what's really great about this guide is for each step to building a childcare action plan, there are sub-steps and further examples in the guide from other local governments, as well as helpful links and resources to get you started on your plan. Later in the webinar, we will hear from 3 communities and their experiences with childcare planning, but also in the guide are some additional examples which can be found. For example, for step 1, we refer to the Delta Child and Youth Committee and also the North Shore Childcare Planning Committee as examples of planning processes at local government level. For step 2, we provide examples and suggest places where you can find relevant community data. For step 3, we provide survey samples and interview guide samples that you can use as part of your engagement. In step 4, we have the City of Vancouver approach to estimating need in the community. And for step 5, we provide a list of communities that have received grants from UBCM to create their childcare action plans and potentially be used as examples. I will now turn it back to Sandra to discuss Guide 2. Oh, Sandra, just on mute.
Sorry, thanks. I'm going to turn my video off again. I apologize for this, but it's just not as stable as we had hoped. So thanks, Sarah, for walking us through Guide 1. So Guide 2 is all about facilitating, securing spaces, financing spaces. It provides insights into a number of actions. In fact, the guides show 9 different ways that local governments can be involved. It's important to remember that you as a local government do not need to take this on alone, nor do you need to absorb all of the costs of childcare. Childcare, as Sarah noted in Guide 1, does need many partners. It really does take a village. There are 4 actions you will see in the guide that we believe that any local government can move on to support and prioritize childcare, regardless of the size or location of the community. And many of these don't require significant investment of resources. So for example, zoning and land use. You can update your zoning bylaws to ensure consistency with the childcare regulations. And you could list childcare as an outright approval wherever it is deemed compatible with other approvals. Second, you could reduce barriers to development, permitting, and local licensing by keeping in mind that most childcare operators and applicants are unfamiliar with the range of approval processes. You could identify one staff as a point person, or you could even waive permit fees. There's a link in the guides to a handbook that lists some of these processes. You could also apply for and secure funds for capital and partner with a nonprofit or other public entity to add childcare to infrastructure that may already be being built in your community, like affordable housing or community centers or hospitals or schools. You could also offer public land or building assets to nonprofits or public entities so they can build childcare. The other 5 approaches in the guide range from using your land use authority through to allocating capital funds. For example, in areas where there is robust development, you could negotiate communities' amenities contributions, CACs, or use density bonus zoning to raise funds for new childcare. A tip if using CACs for an in-kind contribution is that you want to make sure that the facility you are receiving is of good quality. You can in fact determine building standards and criteria, and you want to ensure that the legal agreements for the facility are in fact registered on title. Another way to secure some childcare is to consider including childcare in your capital budget. Strong childcare infrastructure contributes to the economic vitality of your community, just like streets, water, and other community spaces do. You could also identify potential sites by doing a review of public assets that exist in your community. In fact, in the guide, you'll find a link to a tool that the City of Surrey developed, a space prioritization tool to help assess at a very high level of whether land or an existing building is appropriate for childcare. The guide has a number of other tips too, like including childcare as a priority when you're expanding or renovating space, and some ways to ensure that the public and elected officials are well briefed on the needs and priorities so they can advocate or lobby in their circles. Finally, it's important to remember that even without a mandate or legislation, there are indeed a number of ways to increase spaces in your communities. Next slide, please, Sarah. So guide 3, designing and building childcare. This guide is full of information, links, tools, and ideas for a local government who is planning to either build your own spaces or to support others to design and build new spaces. Childcare is a place where children experience the world, and one of the greatest influences on child development is the quality of the settings. You'll see a quote in the guide that states, "A child who attends a childcare program from infancy through to young school age will spend more time in childcare than all of the hours of school, and in their early years may spend more waking hours in childcare than at home." This means that well-designed, inclusive spaces in great locations is critical. But quality childcare facilities are also complex to design. They're highly regulated, and they must meet provincial and local requirements. Fortunately, there is a ton of great information and research about what makes good spaces. And in the guide, you will see a bunch of those links and tips ranging from design and technical guidelines that 2 municipalities, Richmond and Vancouver, have developed, which exceed the licensing minimums, to important considerations like location and adjacency, health and safety, and access to the outdoors. The best location for childcare is near to or located on the grounds of other public amenities like schools or community centers. Ideally, you want a hub of services, not only to offer a full continuum of service to families so children can stay in one location, but also for building construction efficiencies and ongoing management ease. You want to design spaces that are barrier-free and offer easy access and direct access to the outside. You want large open spaces that can be adapted to meet the varying needs of children. And if you're building the spaces and owning them, you want to ensure high quality construction and finishes to ensure longevity and lower maintenance costs. The guide also speaks to the importance of including childcare experts and operators and your local licensing officers early on in the design process to make sure that the spaces will work well for staff and children. The last section of this guide offers you links to a number of design resource tools, both for indoor and outdoor, as well as links to the provincial licensing requirements and the provincial standards of practice. Designing and building spaces is one of the most exciting and interesting roles that anyone can be involved in. Nothing is better than seeing the children's faces when they first come into a new center, when they explore their new environment. It makes all that heavy lifting and hard work worth it. Next slide, please, Sarah. So Guide 4 is all about local regulations and provincial licensing processes. To open a new childcare facility, prospective providers must navigate both municipal local permitting and provincial licensing process, and these can concurrently, but a childcare license to operate from the province will not be issued without all of the local government requirements being met. These two parallel processes can be confusing to understand and challenging to navigate through. Guide 4 provides you with information on the types of childcare facilities and programs that exist in BC, the role that you as the local regulator play, the provincial childcare process, and some tips on how these processes can be more easily navigated. It's important to remember that most prospective childcare operators are not familiar with the rules, the bylaws, the permits, or building requirements. They are not architects or project managers. They know children and they know child development. As a local government, you can support childcare expansion by identifying a position to be the childcare point person, an internal expert, if you will, who can support applicants through the processes. Your OCP and zoning bylaws can be reviewed to ensure childcare is a priority. And you develop a resource document that puts the bylaws, like your permits, bylaws, and so on, anything that might impact childcare into one place on your website, and even have a step-by-step guide that shows how to navigate through all of these pieces. You will see some links in the guides to documents that some municipalities have pulled together. The Regional Health Authority, which is responsible for licensing childcare programs in BC, is often the first place that prospective operators go. The guide shows the process the licensing officers go through. And it's a very good idea for you to have a relationship and regular meetings with your local licensing officer. And in fact, you could consider ensuring that the licensing officers have a broad understanding of the local government requirements and vice versa, you being familiar with the role of licensing. This will help support applicants. You could also create a joint step-by-step guide for prospective applicants. The guide also includes links to OCPs that prioritize childcare and offers some specific tips on how to support applicants. The key piece of advice is to coordinate and streamline the local and provincial processes as much as possible to make it as easy as possible for prospective childcare applicants to find their way through. Back to Sarah.
Thanks, Sandra. So Guide 5, working with childcare operators. And while local governments may be actively looking for ways to secure new childcare spaces through partnerships, land use, or applying for capital funds from the province, they might not have the ability or interest to directly operate the new childcare programs. So in this case, it's really crucial to have clear processes and procedures for selecting and working with an operating partner. Building respectful and mutually reinforcing relationships is a critical piece to the success of any local childcare plan. And among the most important relationship is a local government can develop is with their community child care providers and those agencies who offer complementary services. So strong partnerships will promote comprehensive, coordinated, and integrative programs that are responsive to the evolving needs of children and families. Community partners, we have learned, will also be really strong allies to support change and improve processes in local policy, regulation, and requirements. So through this guide, local governments will be able to reflect on those key relationships. More specifically, Guide 5 reviews how to strengthen local partnerships. So local governments need to engage with key stakeholders to move things forward. And as I mentioned, with the critical relationship with childcare operators. And so in order to strengthen these local partnerships, there's a key tip that we want to share. Because in a typical childcare program, generally all staff that are working directly with children are working with them for at least part of every day. And childcare programs often do not have staff who are available or compensated to attend daytime meetings. Therefore, to strengthen local partnerships, consideration needs to be given to when meetings are scheduled to allow for this full participation. The guide also shares how to support operators to open new childcare centers or expand their current operations. And as Sandra mentioned, childcare operators are typically unfamiliar with the range of regulatory approval processes. Some are, but some are not. And therefore, it's helpful to have these policies and practices that are clearly outlined to make childcare a priority. The guide also discusses how to find a not-for-profit or public partner to operate local government-owned space. And this section provides key considerations for finding a partner. And there are also examples of requests for expressions of interest used by other local governments and some sample lease agreements that were used by the City of Vancouver. Oh, sorry. So while each guide is full of rich and useful information, based on our conversations with many local governments and the advisory committee, we wanted to leave you with our top 5 tips to help you in your planning work. So number 1, make childcare a priority and a focus by bringing partners together. Number 2, have a childcare point person as an internal and external liaison. Number 3, if building your own spaces, include childcare experts early in the planning stage. Number 4, review your zoning, bylaw, and permitting processes to remove any barriers. And number 5, work in partnership with others to formally advocate your needs to senior levels of government. So I just wanted to extend my gratitude and thank you for joining us today as we launched the childcare planning guides for local governments. Your commitment to childcare is incredibly important to help build a more just, equitable, and healthy communities. So thank you for being here today. I will now turn it back to Councillor Jen Ford.
Well, thank you both. That was wonderful and a lot of information. And I think this is really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people will go back and watch the video again. I'm sure that everyone has some questions for our presenters. Please write them down and hold them for the question and answer period, which will begin at about 2:30. Let's move right into our case studies. We have asked our communities to consider 3 questions in their presentations. How did your community get into childcare? What happened that inspired your community to take it on? What actions did your community take and who was involved? What were the successes, learnings, advice that you would give to others? Our first presenter is Chris Duggan, Program Manager, Childcare Community Social Development from the City of Richmond. I'll pass it over to Chris.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Thank you very much. My name is Chris Duggan, and I'm the Program Manager for Childcare with the City of Richmond. And I'm here to share a little bit with you today about Richmond's childcare journey. I've been really pleased to be excited to be part of this process for the last 2.5 years. But our journey does start much before my time. So I hopefully I've done a good job of capturing it. So here's an overview of today's short presentation. I'm going to provide a little bit of history about childcare planning in Richmond, touch briefly on our 2017 to 2022 childcare needs assessment and strategy, discuss 3 of the levers that Richmond uses to support childcare through development, support to operators, and relationships with public partners. And then I'll close with a few of our learnings. The City of Richmond has worked really closely with other childcare providers and city stakeholders to provide quality, affordable, and accessible childcare spaces in Richmond. The initial elements were developed slowly and over time to establish and outline a commitment to childcare, including policy, an advisory body made up of community members, childcare providers, and parents, and a childcare reserve to support this work. With each new layer, a structure for supporting childcare has slowly been created. The review and analysis of Richmond's childcare needs initially began in 1995 with our first needs assessment and strategy. That set the stage and guided city actions to support childcare provision in Richmond. Then we included the construction of our initial 100 spaces of licensed childcare and the contracting of a very small amount of dedicated staff to support this work. As time's gone on, each of these elements has been endorsed and supported by City Council. They all remain in place today, and they've all evolved over time. So this wasn't a policy that was written once back at the beginning and has sat on a shelf. They are documents that we continue to review, revise, and update so that they remain current to our work. They provide a framework to guide the development of actions and priorities, the allocation of city resources, the acquisition of community amenities, and negotiation on future development within the city. So where are we today? The city now has 2 dedicated staff specifically allocated to work on childcare, 10 childcare facilities, and an additional childcare facility and 2 early childhood development hubs under construction. The city's also recently undertaken a childcare action plan through funding from the Union of BC Municipalities and is in the final stages of adopting a 10-year childcare action plan. In 2016, the City of Richmond conducted a comprehensive review and analysis of our childcare needs, and the results were used to develop the 2017 to 2022 childcare needs assessment and strategy. This was the 4th needs assessment and strategy that the city had done and organizes the actions in this document under 7 key strategic directions. This structure has been really helpful to us in determining priorities and partners, identifying key stakeholders, and moving this work forward. It's been endorsed by council and it supports our work. Annual updates to the needs assessment and strategy are completed every year and inform council and our partners of our progress. These are some of the examples of statistics that we review and report out from. And we found it really important to be able to tell our story with consistent key messaging that's easy for people to follow. We have 3 levers through which we support childcare in Richmond, and the first is childcare through development. I'm going to briefly touch on each of the aspects on the slide as we go through summarizing the work that we've done. Through our official community plan and the rezoning process, the city negotiates either the construction of childcare facilities, which are then transferred to the city for ownership upon completion, or the payment of money into our childcare development reserve. That money in the childcare development reserve can be used to fund other projects or other childcare opportunities within the city. In some areas of Richmond, zoning requires this contribution, and in others, it's negotiated in exchange for a density bonus. The team that supports the process of developing city-owned childcare amenities includes a huge number of different departments from within the city and includes planning and development, facilities, parks, building approvals, project development, and Richmond Fire Rescue. We currently have 10 city-owned childcare facilities. All of them are leased to not-for-profit operators, and all have been contributed through development. Early childhood development hubs have also been identified as a priority for the City of Richmond, and this is captured in our official community plan, our social development strategy, and various area plans for the city. Space for not-for-profit organizations to deliver services, have offices, and implement programs is in very short supply in Richmond. So combining these opportunities with licensed childcare benefits not only the operators, but our community as well. In the city center area of Richmond, we've secured 2 early childhood development hubs, and these are both currently under construction and expected to be complete before the end of 2021. As Sandra and Sarah mentioned in their presentation, it's very important that quality be a highlight of childcare design. So to facilitate the construction process for our city-owned childcare amenities, the city's developed a number of tools, including childcare design guidelines, accessibility design guidelines, and a childcare design presentation that we share with developers who we're going to be working with. Each of these tools ensures that the space for the childcare both complies with the childcare licensing regulations and encompasses best practice in childcare design. As mentioned, these do go beyond the minimum standards required in the licensing requirements and do provide quality environments for young children. The childcare design guidelines are then referenced in our construction agreements that are how we secure the development and the childcare facility with our developers. So at rezoning, the childcare provision is confirmed, the design guidelines are written in as a component of this, and the developers then legally required to build to these standards, and documentation of that is secured on title. The second lever and role that the city plays is supporting our childcare operators. We want to make sure that childcare operators are able to create, maintain, and operate spaces in Richmond. And it's important to note that in our community specifically, we have a lot of private operators who provide a significant number of childcare spaces and are valuable partners in the provision of care. As Sandra mentioned, many of our childcare providers are not familiar with complex city processes for development and approval. And so we developed a tool, Creating Childcare Space in Richmond, to clearly outline the process and make it easier for childcare providers to navigate city, fire, and Vancouver coastal health processes. The city also offers annual childcare grants to not-for-profit operators to support their capital needs and quality programming. And these grants are funded through our childcare development reserves. A childcare symposium is offered during Childcare Month, and that's developed in partnership with our Childcare Development Advisory Committee and our Childcare Resource and Referral Program to support professional development and best practice for educators and caregivers in our community. And finally, our city-owned facilities are leased to not-for-profit operators for a nominal lease. Operators are responsible for the operations, care, and upkeep of the facility in exchange for rent of $1 a year. The third lever through which we support childcare is through our relationships with public partners, our local school district, and our health authority. The first piece that's really key in this is identifying people in congruent roles. And initially, we were naturally drawn to our early learning staff and our public health staff, who we work on it on a regular basis with. But these aren't necessarily the best partners to have when we're planning facilities. And so now we have a lot more conversations with facilities and building staff, as they're the ones that are planning long-range facility development within their organizations. Learning about each other's strategies and plans also supports partnerships and supports the provision of childcare in the community. As we know what developments are happening with our public partners, we can explore mutually relevant funding opportunities, such as the New Spaces Funding Program or the recently announced Rapid Renovation Grants, to make sure that there are opportunities to create childcare spaces within the existing and ongoing capital projects of our partners. And finally, I wanted to share a few of the successes and learnings that that we've discovered as we've gone along. You know, as time goes on, our processes evolve and we learn as we go. This is not a process for Richmond that started all at once and has a fixed endpoint. It's something that is continually evolving. And so the commitment to and support of Richmond City Council is obviously key to our work, as are these key points on the slide. So the first is be clear what you want. Data is really important in this. Knowing where you need childcare, how much of it you need, and age and space configurations that would benefit your community are important. I don't know how many times I've been asked, but how big is the shortfall? And that's always a question. And so being able to use data to support what you want and what you need for your community is important. Identify champions within your organization. These may be elected officials, they may be leaders, they may be planners, they may be staff who can't access childcare. The more times childcare is brought up at the table, the more people in your organization who are willing to ask the question, why aren't we considering childcare in this project? The better it is for your getting your needs met. Next one's write it down. Municipal staff, as many of you I'm sure know, are often asked, has this been endorsed by council? Is this in a policy? Is it written in a strategy? Where does it show up in the OCP? And so starting small and building over time is a strong recommendation. Have your council endorse a commitment to childcare, start to embed it in policy, start to embed it in your OCP zoning and bylaws. Make use of opportunities and early discussions. Get childcare to the table early. A particular development or project might not be right for childcare, but every time you start to have that conversation, it reminds people to think about it, and it reminds people of the importance of childcare to your community. And finally, tell the story and continue to tell it. Have an elevator pitch, have some key messages ready. Provide annual written updates that you can share with partners of your strategies and your plans. These keep childcare at the table and keep childcare at the forefront of people's minds so that as opportunities arise, people are ready to capitalize on those. Thank you. And if anyone's got questions that they want to reach out to me privately, my contact information is on the slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great to hear about Richmond's experience. Our next presenter is Beth Veenkamp, Economic Development Officer from the City of Williams Lake. You ready to go, Beth?
I hope so. There we go.
Perfect.
Great. Well, hello,
you.
everybody. I'm Beth Veenkamp. I'm the Economic Development Officer for the City of Williams Lake. So if we look at Richmond's example as maybe a gold star, I would say that Williams Lake is the polar opposite to that. So I'm going to take you through a little story about how a small rural community gets to be featured at a UBCM conference like this. So in Williams Lake, my position is in the development services team, and we have our whole development services department here at the City of Williams Lake is 6 people. So childcare is not something that we talk about every day. It's not something that is particularly on our radar, and it wasn't something that was particularly on the radar of our council. Just we're a very small community, and it sort of is viewed as this is somebody else's job, not the role of local government. What we do have in Williams Lake is a group called the Social Planning Council. And the Social Planning Council is an umbrella organization that has all our different nonprofit agencies coming together underneath an umbrella to make sure that everybody knows what's going on, who's who in the zoo, and how to make good referrals to different organizations. The Social Planning Council actually approached me and said, hey, did you know about this funding through UBCM? We really need to get a childcare plan done for the city of Williams Lake. So they put up their hand and said that if we would apply for the grant, they would undertake the work. So thanks to UBCM, this really wouldn't have happened in Williams Lake without this funding. And it was a pretty easy ask of our council, being that we had a known and reputable contractor that could take on the work. And we basically flowed the money through our financial services department to the organization, and they did the work. And so we started out thinking, okay, we're gonna get an inventory and a plan, and we're gonna take some action. And as the economic development person, my eye is certainly on the New Spaces Fund and pulling some of those dollars into our community. So we got down to work, and this was sort of our methodology. This is what we did. So we had some roundtable groups, key informant interviews with our daycare providers. So those 7 key informant interviews would be our group daycare providers in town. We did a couple of community events where we welcomed providers and their staff in so that we could discuss issues around childcare. And we certainly did those after hours because all of those folks are busy during the day. And we also did a survey so that we could get perspective from both childcare providers and from parents. So what we discovered along this way was that while new childcare spaces were important, the biggest issue that we had in Williams Lake was that we had childcare spaces available, but we did not have the qualified workers to go into those spaces. And that really shifted a lot of the discussion from where we thought we were going to, boy, this is actually a really big problem. The more we sort of dug in and did parent outreach, the more we discovered that we actually have a critical shortage of childcare spaces in our community, and that we could hire tomorrow 22 ECEs to take on the spaces that are available, but not in use due to lack of workers for those positions. The other thing that we really heard from the providers is the enormous amount of stress that they're under because they're so short. And so we heard lots of stories about how people who are ECEs and are working in these centers can't take a sick day, or they feel horrible guilt if they take a sick day, because that means, effectively 8 children have to stay home with their parents that day because there's nobody available. So we really got the message loud and clear that it's quite a crisis situation in town. It all sort of came to a head. You start asking questions and the answers will start coming to you. And we actually had while we were sort of mid-process in getting our plan together, we actually had a delegation of childcare workers come to council and speak to city council about the really sort of crisis situation that we are in Williams Lake, and really connected this to how this is negatively impacting our workforce. So in Williams Lake and in a lot of rural communities in the province, there's a labor shortage. And this is exacerbated by the inability of parents to find childcare so that they can return to work after a parental leave. And so the impacts to the labor force are significant and they shouldn't be ignored. So what can a local government do? Well, we heard from these workers and the delegation, and our council decided what they could do. We're a small community. What can we do is we took on a resolution to our NCLGA group, and then that was passed on through the UBCM resolutions. And we identified a couple of things that was going on in Williams Lake. So there's a shortage of ECE workers across the province, and a lot of that has to do with the wage rates that ECEs are paid. So when you look at the education requirements for an ECE, it's basically a 2-year program. And when you get out of that program, you would make a range from $17, $18 an hour to $21 an hour. And when we look at that and we compare that to a trade, if somebody was going to go into the trades and take a 2-year program to be a welder or get some mechanics behind them, they would get out of that program and they would be making far more than that. And so we thought that there was there's a gender gap here that needs to be addressed, and the provincial government could be the ones to address that. So we called for a minimum $25 an hour wage, and we also called on the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training to look at the gender-biased systems in place that require entrance into the ECE profession with far more is needed to get into this profession than if you were to go to a trade. And that starts from the actual entry into the program. To get into some ECE programs, you need to show a minimum volunteer requirement prior to getting into that. No trade is asking you to volunteer hours in order to get into that profession. So we really think there's some gender biased systems in place there. So we did all of that, but here we are. We're still working away on our plan. We got our plan done, and we came to the conclusion that finding a place to apply for new spaces would work best for our community, given the state of affairs and not having enough qualified ECEs in the workforce. We decided to focus on before and after school care, which is also a need in our community that was identified in the plan. Why we decided to go this way is because the requirements to be an after school care provider are very different than a full ECE credential. And so we thought that we would have better luck finding workers to work in this space than we would if we went for regular infant and toddler spaces where you need that ECE credential. So that was our workaround, and that's where the city felt if we were going to be able to move the needle at all, it would be in this area. So we got down to work, and I'm going to give a shout out to City Spaces, who helped us along with this, because our city was not an expert at this, but we found some people out in the world who were. And so we contracted with City Spaces to help us look and identify and create a plan. And then we also worked with a builder, Zernhalt Construction, who's got some experience building childcare centers under the New Spaces Fund. He's done a couple for some First Nation communities, and he also did one in North Vancouver. And so he was really valuable in coming up with some renderings and plans for what would work and what he had seen somewhere else. So that would be for small communities. There are certainly people out in our province that are experts at this that can guide you along. And between City Spaces, Lanny, I think she's on the call. Lanny was fantastic, Lanny Brun, and Zernhalt Construction. We came up with what we have is a plan now. So when the next intake of the New Spaces Fund opens, we've got a developed plan, and it's our action piece that came out of our plan. So that's just a quick story about how a small rural community who doesn't know much about childcare can start dabbling in it. And thanks for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing William Lake's experience. That's wonderful. Our last presenter is Jamie Sherlock, Recreation and Event Manager from the District of Sicamous, which I said incorrectly the last time, and I do apologize. So welcome, Jamie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Don't worry, lots of people say it wrong. I'm going to laugh a little bit with Beth stating that she's a small rural community, Williams Lake, because I have been there. And Sicamous is a community of 2,400 full-time residents year-round. And with our surrounding area, Malaqua and Swansea Point, we have an additional 1,343. So I guess we would be considered a village on that aspect. So I'm just going to share my screen here with everybody. All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to participate today. I'm very excited to talk about where Sicamous is with childcare. As mentioned, I am the Recreation and Events Manager. I have zero background when it comes to childcare, other than the fact that I am a mom of 3 and my children have used childcare occasionally along the way. So as I mentioned, I am born and raised here in Sicamous. We are a small community of 2,400, and I have known and have experienced myself the lack of childcare in the community. So when I started working for the District of Sicamous back in 2015, this is one thing that I always kind of just put, you know, the pin in the map saying, hey, we need to look at this, we need to look at this. And eventually the squeaky wheel got the grease. We were very fortunate to have Michelle Kirby come and speak to our mayor and council when the MCFD funding was being announced with the provincial government. And from there, that's kind of where the conception of the Sicamous Child Care Center came from. We knew at the time that UBCM as well as the MCFD were going to be presenting with some funds coming out. And at that time, we took it upon ourselves to, sorry, I forgot to turn the screen here. We took it upon ourselves to actually form what we called our Child Care Committee. So we brought in our Eagle Valley Community Resource Center, who had been working countless years on this application and trying to find ways to bring childcare to our community. We brought in our local Splatsin First Nations band to be a partner at our table. And we took in a lot of other folks that needed had a voice in when it came to childcare. So what we did from there is we first went out after the Child Care Action Plan funding. So we were able to successfully receive this funding for $23,000. And what we did from that point is we hired on a contractor, Urban Matters, to actually take in all of that information for us. And what they did is they contacted all of our families. They covered from family size, family dynamics, what care requirements were needed, the financial assessments for our community, because with us being a small, very seasonal community, our child care needs are not the typical Monday through Friday, 8 to 5:30 type of needs. We have very seasonal child care needs here, where Mondays through Fridays is not necessarily the busiest days we have in our community in the summertime. We have businesses that are open until 10, 11 o'clock at night. So we knew that childcare hours were not going to work for us. So that was something that we hammered very hard into our action plan, was the fact that we were not going to be that traditional brick and mortar Monday through Friday childcare center. We also went through with the economy and what we had and tried to come up with ways that we could be creative and know what our standpoint was going to be for families and what they could afford for childcare. Urban Matters then went out into our community. They conducted surveys. We had one-on-one meetings. We had social events that we invited parents to, that things that we knew they were going to be at, like the Christmas recitals at the elementary school, our Santa Claus our Santa Claus breakfast, things like that. Places that we knew, because we are that small community, that we could get out and actually get that information from the parents to help us make the best decision on what type of care we would need in our community. So what came after that? So knowing that the Child Care Action Plan was in its final infancy stages, and we knew that there were still more funding streams being announced by UBCM as well as MCFD. Our Child Care Committee, who are our portfolio system, Councillor Bob Evans, was driving home one day and seeing a for sale sign up at our local Jehovah's Witness church. And he came to our staff and suggested that, hey, wouldn't that make a great daycare center? We should go look at that. So in turn, the staff did go, and we toured the building in late fall. And as I was writing the grant application for the Childcare Creation Spaces program, we actually put a deposit down on the building, crossing our fingers, hoping that we were actually going to get the funding in order to build this daycare in our community. What we did in order to prepare our childcare action plan to build the daycare center is we actually was fortunate enough that the real estate agent actually allowed us into the building. We were actually able to bring in contractors, other childcare providers from surrounding communities. As I forgot to say, is Sicamous did not have any actual licensed childcare facilities in our community. We had one young lady who was doing at home for up to 8 children, and then we had 2 licensed not required. So we had 0 childcare in our community, which is why this was such a big push for me on my part of it. So there is a YouTube link. I'm hoping everybody can access it and see, but this is kind of how the daycare center came to be in Sicamous. Oops.
So we applied for we received $23,500 to complete a daycare study for the needs assessment for the district of Sicamous and Columbia-Shuswap Area E. We hired Urban Matters, a consultant firm out of Kamloops, to provide us with the data and created the report that was used to apply for the actual community spaces childcare grant.
I was driving down Highway 978 towards my home and saw that the building was for sale. And I looked at it and immediately the thought hit me, that would make a great daycare center. So that building would be great for this town. I remember the next day I met with the CFO and our mayor for a coffee, and I bounced the idea off them, and they thought it was a good idea. We was at the next council meeting, and after some discussion, it got passed, and then everybody was freaking out a little bit because we didn't have the money we'd buy a $350,000 building, but the staff, kudos to them, they worked hard, found some grant that was brand new, and I think it was within 3 months we found out that we got the grant to buy that building. Yeah, I was thrilled that we got the grant because it meant that Sicamous could have a really state-of-the-art, brand new facility, fully licensed daycare that would take care of kids, of people that work hard, and give them a place to belong, and also be something that would attract people to our community too, because then it would give folks a chance to know that they have great daycare that's available to them when they move to Sicamous, and that's something that's going to help our community grow too. My wife is a preschool teacher for the last 20 years, and we went in there to take a tour when it was done, and the toys were set up and everything, and Sandra's jaw dropped to the floor, and we were just in awe of how beautiful it is. It is the Taj Mahal of daycares in the Shuswap.
I'm very proud to say that we're able to offer this daycare center to our community, and it's been probably one of my proudest moments being here in Sicamous for my entire life.
Thanks to the council and the staff for their vision to make this happen.
This is truly a watershed moment for the district of Sicamous as we open up the daycare facility, a much needed complex in the community. And for years we've been without a daycare facility. So we want to thank the province for the grant funding that they gave us in order to have the financial means. I'd like to thank the District of Sicamous Council for having the foresight in which to actually purchase this building, in spite of the fact that we still didn't have the grant funding, but we went ahead and we did it anyway. And then after that, we were able to find a way to completely financially support this through the grant funding application. I also like to thank Brian Anderson and Bayview Boys for taking the initiative and rebuilding this facility as well, and using local help in order to build this out. I'd like to thank the Eagle Valley Resource Center, and Penny's here with me today, and taking on the initiative to actually manage this facility as well. I'd like to also thank Jamie Sherlock and her work with Bob Evans, a counselor, as they were very adamant in making this happen. And it's been an awesome project, and it was majorly needed, and it's going to be a super addition to the community right now. And at this date, I'm going to ask Penny to give me a hand, and we're going to actually take these giant scissors and we're going to officially open up the daycare, and we're going to cut this ribbon. So there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I hope that everybody could see that video. We're quite proud of where we came from and where we started with this building. So after we were notified, the grant announcement, we were notified that we received the grant of $884,000, February 18th of 2020. I was away on holidays and my operations manager made sure that I knew while I was gone. So it was made for a very exciting night, let me tell you. Shortly after our community announcement was made on February 26th regarding the funding, that's when COVID-19 hit. So a lot of the excitement and the buildup for what we were hoping to do within our community about the daycare center was definitely overshadowed by the COVID-19. And of course, then with all the further restrictions that came down from the province, it created its own challenges as most of our staff members were working from home. But luckily, like I said, being a small community, we were able to make it work probably better than in an urban setting. So what were we working with? So like I mentioned, we purchased a Jehovah's Witness hall, and like most Jehovah's Witness halls built up into the last few years, there is no windows within this building. So we were working with a very, very dark, very drab kind of building. And so what we needed to do is we needed to make sure that we adhere to all of the childcare regulations, and that we needed to and in order to make sure that we had this, we needed to put out an RFP to all the builders to take this on. We were very fortunate. We had 4 companies that submitted proposals for us. And knowing that none of us were experts in the childcare centers, we collaborated with other childcare centers in the region to help us build the design once that we awarded the contract. And the nice part about this daycare center is it was built by a local company, which allowed us not to have any hiccups with the COVID-19. And it actually kept us on schedule. So we're quite happy to say that. So once we got the RFP put in place and we had the contractors the building bought, the contractors hired, then we came into the dilemma of who was going to run the daycare center. We knew within our council and within our staff here that the District of Sicamous would not be the ones to operate the daycare center. So what we did is we spent a lot of time researching and coming up with an RFQ to provide the opportunity for either a not-for-profit or a for-profit individual to come in and operate the childcare center for the District of Sicamous. Our first learning curve, that did not work. The RFQ included a lease amount of $2,000 per month plus utilities, and our response was 0 submissions for that. So what we did is we withdrew the RFQ, went out again, spoke with other agencies, spoke with our neighboring community centers, our neighboring daycare providers and not-for-profits, and then asked them what they would do. They were very helpful and came to the plate and gave us a lot of great suggestions. From there, we then put it back out for an RF or an expression of interest. Sorry, I never get these terms right. I'm very new to all these things still. And what we did is we opened it up, and we had a lady by the name of Penny Dieter show up to our community. They were moving to our community, and she had 40+ years of experience in the childcare field. So of course, what did we do? We hired her to be our consultant. So Penny got to work really quick for us. She prepared a business plan for the childcare center to ensure that we captured all the moving parts, because again, like I said, when it came to the contractors and building, none of us in our community were experts when it came to daycare. From them, We then received a joint application from our Eagle Valley Community Support Society and our Sicamous Preschool, who then we actually awarded the contract to. And because Penny had moved to the community, they actually approached her. And as you see in the video, they actually hired Penny Dieter to be our executive director of our daycare with all of her vast knowledge. So to ensure that we were going to make the daycare be profitable, make sure that we were going to be able to do everything, we came to council with a very, very big ask, but they understood what we needed to have happen in order to make this daycare center. So we have a 3-year lease agreement with the Eagle Valley Community Support Society at a lease rate of $1 per year for the first 3 years. There will be no charge for their taxes, water or sewer for 3 years. For the first 2 years, we will cover all the utilities. So the power, the propane, and snow removal, lawn care, and any maintenance that needs to be covered by our district staff. And then at a 1.5 years, we will then go into a renewal process with them to see if they need an additional 1 year of support, or if they feel confidently that they can then move on and take on those expenses on their own. The society must be prepared to report each year and present it to the district council. And the society, of course, will be given the first year, the first option to renew their contract moving forward after that 3 years. So let the renovations begin. As you can see, this was a very drab looking building. There was no windows, so we needed to go and make sure that we adhere to all of the childcare regulations. I learned a lot about childcare over this 2.5 year process, and I feel that I'm fairly fluent in all daycare regulations. So these are just some of the before and after photos that we had. We hired a designer who was also local as well. She was very integral in our application for the funding and actually did 3D renderings and drawings that we submitted for our funding application. We learned a lot along the way by dealing with other daycare providers. Make sure you do your research on colors. We kept everything very bright and natural, and we've been made aware that you don't want to put things on the wall. We thought, oh, we put our logos, we put our decals, we put our branding on the walls, but what we've come to learn is that's not what we should be doing, and that we should be letting the children's art be that one that actually highlights the center. And a term that kept coming up from a lot of people was the word hyper diapers. So don't use the colors red or orange in your centers, I'm told. So the other big thing that was a real eye opener for us when we started completing the budget in order to put in our grant application is that buying furniture, as fun as it is very costly. So make sure that you are looking into the best quality that you can, because if you are going to buy it, you want to make sure that it lasts. And again, keeping with that theme as that neutral and bright, we tried to make sure that all the furniture within our center matched everything that we were doing on the floors and the walls as well. So we definitely had some challenges. So my words of advice is always make sure that you read all the regulations closely. We definitely made a few mistakes along the way, but thankfully they were fairly minor and that they were fairly easy to rectify. Certain things like dishwasher certification. Your dishwasher may say that it goes to a certain temperature, but unless it has that stamped seal of actual certification, it's not going to be approved by your health officer. Make sure that you have your playground heights correct. This is one thing that we learned because we're looking at eventually building onto the location that we have, so we can include an infant toddler, and I can gift the after school program that the district of Sicamous currently runs. So we bought a playground thinking that, okay, set ages 2 to 12, but there are definitely some height requirements that you need to make sure that you are aware of. So then that way, you know that, that you're fitting all those regulations. We strongly recommend reaching out to other childcare providers for advice before and during of the creation of the space. We had one complete layout that we thought was going to be perfect for our childcare center. We invited a lady in from Enderby who completely gutted all of our plans and redid them. But when she explained them to us and showed us why she made those choices, it made perfect sense. And now having someone who has that background in that center, she said we couldn't have built a better center because we captured all those safety issues that we never would have thought of just being Joe Blow off the street. We also had to thank the Shuswap Family Daycare Society, as they were very instrumental in helping us put out the EOI that we put forward. And both of them were very happy to see Sicamous get a daycare center, because they were both at max capacity and had lots of families contacting them from our community to see if they could get spaces in their center. So we can thank them enough for all of their assistance through this project. So where are we now? Our center officially opened its doors Tuesday, February 16th, which was 363 days after being awarded the Community Childcare Space Creation Grant. We're happy to report that we have 14 full-time and 2 part-time children currently enrolled. And just to give you an idea, for our community and the local surrounding area, we have less than 80 children between the ages of 0 and 5. So we have a pretty good high percentage rate already in our center. Our society is kind of keeping with the First Nations feel and our surrounding area. We chose to name the center the Little Bear Childcare, and that they will have their website up and running by the end of this month. Like you mentioned, our executive director has vast knowledge, and she'll be working in partnership with our Splatsing Childcare Center in Enderby on a partnership to ensure that we're including First Nations programming into our center. And one of her key goals is to make sure that we become a teaching center. We were fortunate; we had lots of ECEs or ECEAs in our community, or young moms who are going through the process, but they were having trouble getting that practicum piece. So our hope is that our center will be that practicum piece, that when they are completing either their in-class courses, or if they're doing online components, that our center can be that center where they can come to gain those necessary hours to ensure that we always have qualified ECEs in our community. That's all that I have. So I'm open to any questions at the end. I'm sorry I'm not the best presenter, but I did my best.
That was excellent, Jamie. Thank you so much. And you could definitely feel there's a lot of community support and passion in your project, which takes a 4-wall building to a real place for children to thrive. So thank you for your commitment to your community. So we'll now have an open discussion. There are many people on this call, so to keep things fluid, please type your question into the question and answer box, not into the chat, just to keep things in one place. And then please indicate which presenter your question is for. I'll go through those questions one by one. And if you are if you're calling in from the phone number, please press *9 and you can ask your question that way. We do have 2 moderators helping me monitor the chat and the question and answer. So the question and answer box for your questions, and any questions? I don't see any at this time. Are there any questions that you can see, either Kelsey or Marilyn? Oh, there's one. Here we go. Okay, so for Chris in Richmond, curious to hear whether having targets by neighborhood has been helpful.
Thanks, Meredith, that's a great question. We, until now, haven't had targets. We've reported on spaces per 100 children. And so our childcare action plan, which is about to be released in the next couple of months, is the first time that we'll have targets. We haven't done them by neighborhood. We have done them across Richmond as a whole and by age group. But I'm happy to fill you in on that at a Metro Vancouver meeting when we actually have some information.
Great. Second question from Heather Evans. Question for Richmond. Chris, did you say there are 3 types of childcare reserve funds, and could you explain the 3 and how they work?
Yes, we do have 3. So one is a citywide capital fund. So funds that go into that reserve can be used anywhere in the city. and can only be used for capital costs. So that's how we fund our childcare grants program. And that is how we fund childcare development. There's also a very small geographically specific reserve for the West Canby neighborhood. Again, capital only, but can only be used within that geographic area. And then we have an operating reserve, which can be used for operational costs. So originally, 90% of all developer contributions went into the capital reserve and 10% into the operating reserve. And we've recently just done a bylaw amendment so that that split is now 70-30, so that we can fund one of our staff positions out of the operating reserve.
Excellent, thank you. This question isn't directed at anyone in particular, but someone may want to jump in on this. Are the school districts looking at taking any leadership on locating and operating childcare on their elementary school properties?
So maybe it's Sandra.
Great,
Maybe
thank
I can take this one, and then my colleagues on the call may be able to jump on as well. So yes, the short answer is there's a lot of school districts who have been very engaged and are being more and more engaged in childcare. Kind of 3 examples just off the top of head. Nanaimo School District recently secured nearly 400 licensed childcare capital funding for nearly 400 licensed spaces on their various elementary school grounds. The Oliver School District has been piloting an amazing seamless before and after school child's care program, partnered with the teachers in the classroom. So using classroom space for before and after school. The Vancouver School District, in a partnership with the City of Vancouver, is actually looking at all new school, elementary and now even high school that are being built, are looking to place large childcare facilities, 69 space childcare facilities, typically on the top floor of those new elementary schools. So there's lots of school boards taking lots of interesting leadership. So not sure if other folks on the call want to jump in, my panelists.
Does anybody have anything they want to add? Go ahead, Chris.
I can add what Richmond has recently been doing. Richmond recently received a new spaces grant to include childcare in a seismically upgraded school. And they are also compiling applications for some rapid renovation grants to convert some, who knows if space is ever really surplus, anyway, some school space to dedicate it to childcare. So Richmond is also doing some preliminary work in this area.
Excellent. Okay, I'll go to the next question. This is from Dale Bumstead. My question is to Richmond. Do you have any experience with expanding the childcare services for overnight or expanded services beyond normal work hours of 8 to 5? I'm interested in exploring an expanded service for our healthcare workers.
That's a great question. And it's one of the targets that we've set in our childcare action plan. We don't currently have any childcare providers providing care overnight. We do have some offering some extended hours. And we did explore this a lot with our community during the early stages of COVID, when we were looking at delivering care primarily to the children of essential service workers. And so we did have a couple of providers who were interested in this idea, but we didn't see a huge demand being expressed by the community, so that didn't go forward. Our childcare action plan does identify a very conservative target of one essentially family childcare or multi-age childcare facility that would provide overnight care within the next 10 years. So baby steps for us, but it is definitely something that we're looking at.
Okay, just a reminder, please put your questions in the question and answer box and not into the chat, because I can only monitor one at a time. Okay, so for Spark, could you speak more to what you've found to be zoning best practices?
I can speak a little bit to that and say that I'm definitely not the expert on zoning best practices, but if you look to Guide 2, that's where we outline different options and different examples that different local governments have taken and some steps that that you can take as a local government. Sandra, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in here. So a couple of things that we learned was key, and I think that you may have heard a little bit from our amazing presenters here as well, is making sure the definitions that you have for childcare, the language you're using to describe daycare, childcare, et cetera, is actually aligned with what the childcare licensing regulations are. So you're not kind of competing or putting an unintended barrier in place. Having a really clear outright approval language, if childcare is allowed in certain zones, make sure that that is clearly articulated right up front so that you're not needing to field questions. However, you need to make sure those are, of course, compatible with any other outright approvals that you have. And taking a look, I guess, at, and this is more around permitting and some of the other licenses, but what's happening with the parking requirements? What's happening with kind of access pieces? Are there, safety, health and safety considerations? For example, if you're doing an outright approval, are there in fact health and safety considerations, like you want to make sure that childcare doesn't land next to some major industrial site that may not be deemed safe? Again, I look to my partners from the municipalities on the panel if they have anything else to share.
Is there anyone else that wants to add to that question? Okay, let's move along to the next question. It was mentioned that Williams Lake is petitioning the province to increase ECE wages and remove gender bias. Is UBCM taking any steps to advocate these needs to the province? We have received a number of resolutions at the executive over the last couple of years advocating for a number of different aspects of childcare, which have been endorsed and moved forward through our advocacy meetings with the province. One in particular that comes back over and over is the Coalition of Childcare Advocates and their 10-a-day plan. And we know that the ministry, both the Ministry of Family and Children's Development and Minister Chen's area of expertise have been looking at that in a number of different ways. Tying it to a specific dollar per hour wage can be a little bit challenging because that becomes sort of the target, but really a livable wage is what most communities are striving for here. If there's anybody else that wants to jump in on that.
Hi, it's Beth. So a livable wage isn't going to cut it. This is a field where you are required a minimum 2 years of education and all of the costs associated with that. And so if we look at the whole sector and the lagging workforce going into that sector, you got to think, if I'm going to invest in my education, what's my outcome going to be? We know that childcare workers do it because they love the job and they love working with kids, and that's really the call. But at the end of the day, you have to feed your own children and keep your own lights on. And so that wage level was intentional. And I know it's tricky and it's hard, and that was just a resolution from Williams Lake. And I know that a lot of work around the province has been focused on this, and it's really good work. The other piece that the province could look at is increasing access to those spaces. So in Williams Lake, you are not able to get ECE training locally, which means you have to go to Kamloops or Prince George, which just increases the whole cost. So if we really want to give early childhood education sort of the props that it deserves, we've got to look at it as better than babysitters. And that's been something that we've really been trying to shift the narrative around. And we're talking about early childhood education, not babysitting or child minding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Your earlier example of the welder going to school for 2 years and then coming out and expecting a much more significant ability to pay their own bills really hit home for me. I guess just to add to this topic, something we did here in Whistler, we gave first right of refusal to some of the affordable rental housing projects that have gone through their process. But the first right of refusal is for childcare workers as an essential worker, which helps us hopefully attract some childcare teachers with housing, because that is certainly a huge gap for us in being able to recruit people to come and work here after they've completed their ECE training. So that's one option, but it's certainly not an option for everywhere where you may or may not have affordable housing. Okay, I see another question here. ECE staffing challenges, like the teaching center example from Sicamous. How else can local governments support recruitment and retention of childcare staff? Sandra?
Yeah, maybe I'll take this one first, and again look to my colleagues on the call. This is a really, really challenging one. You know, as we said, local governments don't have the resources or the mandate. It's not even your legislated responsibility to deal with this. So this one's challenging. We certainly encourage where you can to lobby and advocate to those senior levels of governments where they have, you know, the resources to make some of these changes happen. There are some things that we've seen done and are in fact recommending in some of the planning work that we've done, and that is to really promote early childhood education as an important field, an important piece of work, you know, by doing kind of a public relations or a public education campaign, looking at some of the ideas that have come up in communities is looking to work with the school districts around how do you encourage and promote early childhood education in those, you know, early articulation programs that exist. So building and, you know, really trying to encourage folks to focus. But the challenge that is in front of us, and we've heard it, is it's a very difficult job. It's not a well compensated job, and until, you know, it becomes that, it's going to be an ongoing critical challenge that we're going to face across the province and indeed across the country. We're not the only ones facing this.
That's true. Exactly. Thank you. This question is for each of the panelists. Can you speak to any strategies or lessons learned in funding the full costs of ongoing facility operations and maintenance, including future facility renovations or upgrades?
I can speak to that one, Jen.
Great, thank you.
So the City of Richmond doesn't actually fund everything related to that childcare facility. So the operator does receive a nominal lease of $1 a year. And the operator is also, all of our operators are supported in the process of applying for and receiving permissive tax exemptions. So they don't pay property taxes on that facility. But there is a very detailed repair and maintenance schedule in each of our leases that outlines what is the city's responsibility and what is the operator's responsibility. And typically the operator pays for regular repairs and maintenance of the space, and the city pays for security, life safety systems, and capital replacements and upgrades that are required. And so one of the ways that the city supports our operators in that work is that they are eligible to apply for our capital grants program, which can fund the costs of needed upgrades or renovations that they choose to do, or the purchase of furniture and equipment to decrease their need to replace their own pieces of the facility. So bottom line is the city doesn't fund everything. We just don't charge a lease rate. And so operators do pay for a fairly significant portion of the repair and maintenance costs.
That's the
And
same
maybe-
as what we're doing in Sicamous as well. That's why we said we had the 3-year lease with them. And our hope was by doing that, we would get them to get to that point where they have a little bit of capital funding that they can have socked aside. But then we would work with them on anything that was significant. So, you know, if a child flushes a ball down the toilet, that's on them to fix. But if there's something wrong with, you know, with the sewer lines, or if the roof starts to leak, that's things that we would cover. And the reason why we went into that with the 3-year lease is because we know a lot of other grant opportunities for them to apply need to be able to sustain that 3-year budget that they have to submit for grant applications. Our hope is, like I mentioned, we do run an after school club with our district of Sicamous. So our hope is a little bit later, maybe a year down the road, once they get their feet wet, we will apply for additional funding on their behalf to build another center for an infant toddler / after school club. Our school starts at 8 o'clock, so we don't really have a before school need at this point in time. But our hope is then everything will be at one location, a one-stop shop, so that child can stay there right from infancy right up until they reach grade 6 and they move on to middle school.
Just a couple of other things, if I can throw into the mix. One is the guide. I'm going to do a plug for the guide. The guide actually has a link to the City of Vancouver's lease that Chris spoke about, a real detailed lease around who's responsible for what. That's a really key thing to have in place so everybody knows what they're going in for, and also for you that your operator can begin to look at, you know, planning and thinking about, you know, putting those resources aside that they're going to need. Nonprofit operators also do have access to grants and to project funding, you know, to help with some of the maintenance or replacement kind of costs. And of course, there's operating dollars that they are able to access as well from MCFD as part of operating childcare.
Great, thank you. This one may be covered by the guide. Where do we find requirements for licensing in BC as far as regulations and staff education? Is there a website?
It's in the guide. There's all kinds of links to not only the actual regulations, but the standards of practice. And I think what Jamie was talking about was, you know, kind of the things that are required and what's important in the design. There is dozens of tools and resources available, and links. And most importantly, links to the provincial regulations, so for sure.
Perfect, thank you. ECE BC and CCA BC have a document about a provincial wage grid based on education and experience, and there's a link there which I will get someone to share into the chat for everyone's information. Are there any other local governments that have connected childcare to housing and or poverty reduction? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I can maybe share. There's a couple of municipalities I know. The city of Burnaby is working hard on their affordable non-market housing and also looking at childcare going into those. So there's a few examples there. It's high on the list. There's a number of communities that are looking at their affordable housing right now. And we know in partnership with BC Housing that there has been some funding and some childcare resources being considered right now.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Sicamous was also awarded a fairly significant grant a few years ago for affordable housing complex, and the challenge has been finding the right location. Now that we have found the right location, we literally are probably 450 meters away from our daycare center as it stands. So we are really excited to see that project happen and help a lot of other families in our community that need affordable housing.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
We've also done one project in Richmond where we had affordable housing units in the same building as where we were going to have a 37 space childcare program. And so rather than go out separately for a service provider to deal with both of those, we put out one request for expressions of interest for someone to operate both the childcare and the affordable housing. And so have quite a unique partnership with Atira Women's Resource Society, where their affordable housing units are second stage housing for women and children who have fled situations of domestic violence. And so those women also have priority access to the childcare on site. And the childcare also provides both some volunteer and practicum experience for moms that want to then go into ECE as a career. And it's been a really great partnership and one that we want to explore in other opportunities as well.
Great, thank you. This is just a comment. Deb had graduated from ECE in 1976 and upgrading in 1991, raising 4 children. It just didn't pay enough. It's about time for a change. Hear, hear. Okay. Where does the school board's Strong Start programs factor in as an ECE and parental respite? Anyone have an answer for that?
I can maybe take a first cut at that one.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, the Strong Starts are amazing programs, amazing opportunities for children with young families, you know, to access early childhood experiences. They don't typically, though, meet the full childcare needs of a working family. They often are patchwork, and the reason the hours of operation are typically kind of a half day for a Strong Start program, but also the parent or caregiver needs to remain on site with the child. And so they can sometimes fill in, you know, as part of a patchwork of child care if there's somebody else that is able to take the child, but they're not meeting the needs of working families or families who are, you know, pursuing post-secondary education and so on. But they're amazing programs.
Yeah. Okay, there was a question. Did Williams Lake and Sicamous do any updates to their zoning bylaw or OCP?
Actually, currently in Sicamous right now, we're going through a zoning bylaw reamendment, so it'll be captured within that document.
Okay, great. And Williams Lake?
Did a scan and found that there wasn't anything really impeding childcare development other than will. But I've been taking notes from Sandra today, and maybe we can just make it abundantly clear in some of our policies and procedures that childcare is welcomed.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Are there any new provincial guidelines for school districts and childcare operations and governance? That's a question from Andrea. Does anyone have something to add to that?
And Andrea's actually put in the link, the School Act has in fact changed to explicitly allow school districts to operate before and after school childcare. That wasn't there before, and a ministerial order to go along with that. Those are the things that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I'm sure everyone on the call today has read through all of the mandate letters of all the different ministers, and it is exciting to see there's quite a strong commitment from this government to making childcare more universally accessible for our communities. So certainly keep an eye and speak to your own MLAs and ministers when you get a chance to continue to advocate in this area. That is always helpful. We have another question from Wendy. Our childcare staff need a benefits package, extended health, dental, RRSPs. We have no pension plan. Any suggestions?
I
It's a tough one.
I know that was one of the challenges that we looked at when we were weighing out the options of whether or not it was going to be a municipal ran childcare center, if we were going to put it to the not-for-profit. Reason being, going with the not-for-profit is the access to the grants and things like that a municipality normally can't have. The hope with the Eagle Valley Community Support Society, by adding more staff with the daycare center falling under their umbrella, that then gave them the necessary staff needed to actually go after a competitive wage subsidy, or not wage subsidy, a benefit package. And I do know, like, lots of times that they've come in and talked to our local Chamber of Commerce, because our Chamber of Commerce has access points and things like that. So benefits is always a very challenging one. And I do know, talking with our surrounding childcare centers that we were working with, that's one of the key things. They may not be able to offer that top of the line wages, but they had a very healthy benefits package for those individuals working for them, and little perks, things like it's your birthday, you get the day off, and, you know, like things like that. So it's something that I agree that needs to be rallied a lot more at the federal and the provincial government, for sure.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for answering those questions. That was fun. I don't see any further questions, but certainly if you have questions after this, all of the presenters made their contact information available, and we're certainly happy to connect you with those contacts after this webinar closes. Thank you everyone for attending today and for your patience with the virtual meeting. I thought it was pretty smooth. Thank you so much to both staff members from UBCM that have been running everything in the background for me and keeping everything on track. That was great. It was my pleasure to chair this event today. Thank you again to the Ministry of Children and Family Development for funding this project, and to our contractors, Sandra and Sarah from Spark BC, for your hard work in drafting this resource. Lastly, thank you to Chris Duggan, Beth Veenkamp, and Jamie Sherlock for sharing your stories today, which were truly inspirational. Definitely gave us a lot to think about, and really makes it easy to understand and how it can apply to our own communities. If you'd like to download a copy of the guide and the associated templates, or forward this webinar to those who couldn't make it, please visit the UBCM website under the Health and Social Development section, where everything will be posted. That is all we have for today, and you have 5 minutes given back to your day. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day.